Welcome to the Menopause Shift Summit, where we help you demystify and try to understand exactly what's happening with your perimenopause and menopausal body so that you can thrive into the next chapter of your life. I'm your co-host, Anne-Marie McQueen. I'm a journalist who loves to research all things perimenopause and menopause as part of my platform, Hot Flash Inc. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Mikhail Kogan, an integrative geriatrician. He's the co-author of the 2021 book, Medical Marijuana, Dr. Kogan's evidence-based guide to the health benefits of cannabis and CBD. Dr. Kogan walks people through how they can safely use cannabis and CBD to treat many of their health issues, and that includes the symptoms you're experiencing as part of perimenopause and menopause. I hope you enjoy our interview. Hi, Dr. Kogan. How are you today?
Hi, so wonderful to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being part of the Menopause Shift Summit. This is a very emerging part of this story. And so I really wanted to get you on because you literally wrote the book on this last year.
Yeah, I did. Here it is.
There it is, Medical Marijuana.
It is.
Okay, first of all, we'll just go basic. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to be a cannabis expert?
You know, I actually don't call myself cannabis expert. I think there are people that I highly respect that are way more expert in this. I think what happened with me is in 2010, when DC passed the law allowing medical cannabis for patients, I started getting bombarded with patients' inquiries. And, you know, I'm an integrative medicine physician and a geriatrician and palliative care doc. So I kind of take care of people in their older years and trying to use minimum amount of medications and procedures. And so sort of, I think it's by default that people were seeking me out saying, hey, you're an integrative doc, so you need to know about this. And I'm like, yeah, I probably should. So I started looking into this, and as luck had it in 2012, I met Dr. Donald Abrams, who's kind of a grandfather of the whole field of medical cannabis. Is a #1 research in US, or first researcher in US who started looking into benefits of cannabis in HIV population. We're talking 30 years ago. So when no one talked about this, you know, it was just, anyway, so he and I were served on the board of integrative medicine as founding members. And he kind of turned me into saying, yeah, for your older adults, that's a godsend. And he was right. I mean, he was sort of giving me road forward without me even knowing about it. So I've kind of jumped on wagon, learned, and one of my patients in 2017, I think, introduced me to Joan Liebman-Smith, who's my co-author on the book. And Joan is a professional writer, so she had some ideas. We originally wanted to write a book about medicine for older adults. We went to a few publishers. They said, forget that, that's not sexy enough. But we heard Dr. Kogan is interested in cannabis. Well, that's sexy enough. I said, I'm not a writer, especially let alone cannabis. What the hell? They said, yeah, but here's contract. And we're kind of like, okay. So yeah, so it was a sort of just circumstances. And I think what I'm proud about the book, particularly, it's extremely patient and people's friendly. There's a lot of excellent cannabis book like Cannabis Pharmacy and, you know, Bonnie's book. I mean, there's a lot of different great books. The problem that a lot of them are written by physicians, and so their language is too medical and too detailed. I think Jones really wrote the book for everybody. It kind of took, I like to be very humorous. I grew up in Russia. I take everything sarcastically and with a humor. It's a little weird time for me to say that, but yet at the same time, that's the way to get over this crap that's going over there. And, you know, so I use a lot of humor in my work and life. And so I think the book kind of took that on. And this topic is also lends itself for a gazillion amount of jokes. And just generally, I think, can take this topic quite lightly because it's a very serious topic, but in itself, we took this topic for decades too serious on a political level. And so I think it needs to be a little watered down and simplified for masses. And also, I think that it's such a profoundly underutilized plant that have literally touches beneficially every aspect of our living and our health. And menopause is not any different. I'm sure dive right in, but I can tell the listeners pretty much that whatever the medical problem you think about, cannabis will have a role in there. And the reason for that is very simple, because we have our own cannabis system inside of us. We're calling this endocannabinoid system, or short ECS. And it's something that's actually the oldest hormonal system in our body. You know, we always talk about endorphins or endogenous opiates. We talk about neurotransmitters, things like dopamine. Those are all relatively new development and evolution. But if you look in animal kingdom, the oldest system we have in brain, it's limbic system, and then the rest of the body is the cannabis system. So how come that our bodies co-evolved with this plant? It's a question upstairs, not to me. But the reality is we have, for millions of years, humans and all kinds of animals co-evolved with this plant that produces molecules that are similar to what we produce. Cannabis is not the only plant that does this. There's a lot of plants out there that mimic some of our internal workings, but cannabis is probably, in terms of endocannabinoid system, obviously is the most prevalent mimicker or co-evolver, if you wish.
Okay.
So yeah, and another tidbit of information, which is outlined in the book very nicely, it's the old medicine we know. It's the first documented, oldest medicine that was documented in Chinese medicine, original books dating more than 5,000 years ago. It was used for dozens of medical problems back then. And even in our own backyard, in the United States, cannabis was the most heavily used medicine until 1930s. Every single pharmaceutical company was making it. Every pharmacy carried it. Every doctor prescribed it. Every patient took it. So entire U.S. was taking cannabis until Prohibition era, which was made up crap. I lived through a similar situation in Russia. So highly parallel for me that something that has so much benefit was prohibited for no particular reason, just because they needed a scapegoat on the political level in both countries here and there. And so everything was lie. The addiction was a lie. The toxicity was a lie. Everything was a lie. And so then subsequent culture grew up with this. And there is addiction potential, but there's an addiction potential to coffee and to the alcohol and to the cigarettes and to cucumbers. To anything. I mean, sure, it's stronger to cannabis than cucumbers, but actually not stronger than to coffee.
Okay, not stronger than coffee.
Coffee addiction is thought to be on a certain physiological level is stronger. Withdrawal from caffeine is harder for some patients than withdrawal from long-use THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the intoxicating molecule in the plant cannabis.
Okay. And where is the research at now? Just for the general use. I understand from your book, there's less in the US and a lot of it that's coming out of the rest of the world. Can you just sort of frame?
Right. It's particularly actually the first bulk of research came out of Israel, because Israel is the first country as a whole country that legalized medical use. I actually was just there last week at the pretty large conference. And it's pretty fascinating amount of research they're doing on a level of practical applications. One of the problems with research in the US, we can't really conduct federally sponsored trials because as a Schedule 1 controlled substance, you can't obtain federal funding to study benefits. You can only study side effects. Israel got over that. So they actually have a federally funded studies in Israel that are, way further ahead of us. But nonetheless, there's a lot of real research. I mean, I think, unfortunately, there's a misunderstanding saying there is no research in cannabis because it's a controlled substance. That's just not true. We have studies showing that's very profound benefit for chronic pain. We have studies showing now in the last couple of years that it's quite beneficial for sleep. We have studies that CBD is somewhat beneficial for chronic different types of anxieties. We have studies comparing combination of CBD to THC to existing medications showing that they're better for pain than everything we have. So in 2017, talking about like the hard summary of the research, if you will, In 2017, National Academies of Sciences put out a very comprehensive assessment with the help of experts. Donald was one of the experts who was invited. And they analyzed every existing piece of data. There were 20,000 studies. And they basically looked at all the data and they said, cannabis is the best thing we have out of everything that for chronic pain. We don't have anything better. No medications, no procedures, no nothing. So it's a grade A recommendation. What grade A means is that if this would be a drug, it would be a bestseller instantly. So, and that data came out in January 2017. It hasn't shifted anything. It hasn't shifted the war on opioid overuse. It hasn't shifted the fact that cannabis is still by a lot of chronic pain clinics considered a no-no. So, evolution of cannabis is slow to definitely to my liking. But in terms of research, the research is all there for pain. There's no need to do more research. Like as Donald jokes, I don't need to study aspirin to tell me that it works for pain, right? It's moronic. It's exactly the same with cannabis. We don't really need studies. What we need studies for to figure out exactly the dosing. So how should we give it? Who should get it first? At what ratios of THC to CBD? At what dosing, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of expert opinion. There's certain recommendations. There was recently a national recommendation recommending start with CBD for chronic pain. And then when you reach to about 40 to 60 milligrams a day of CBD, add THC. I disagree with that recommendation. I don't think that's too sound, and I don't think it's based on a lot of research. I think THC for pain is must for most patients. That's been my also clinical experience. But at this point for pain, THC is usually my second line. First line is usually non-pharmacological, physical therapy, exercise, lifestyle adjustment. Some vitamins like B-complex magnesium for pain are often quite useful, but they usually don't really cure the pain. They just kind of help a little. But the cannabis can cure certain types of pain, literally. So neuropathic pain, cannabis has potential after quite a while to be curative, meaning you can start withdrawing it and you have no condition at all. It's gone and you don't have to use anything. That doesn't happen a lot, but it periodically does happen. Other conditions, I would definitely say cannabis has a fascinating role to play in the future is different skin problems. Eczema, psoriasis. We published a case not so long ago, use of cannabis to cure psoriasis. And there's a good amount of upcoming literature. There's also a ton of companies that try to make drugs because it ends up being a lucrative financial area. Definitely for that. There's a lot of interest in cannabis and cancer. The best evidence for that is really just to treat the symptoms of cancer and cancer-related treatments, such as nausea, vomiting, pain related to cancer. It's a little bit more, well, not a little bit, it's very controversial to be using cannabis to cure cancer. Yeah. I would say that everyone who's seen enough patients have seen such cases, myself included. I've seen a list of cases that I can only define as miracle when patient was taking cannabis and cancer just disappeared. Unfortunately, we can't clarify how that happens and to whom and why. And the trials are quite few in between. We only have conclusive data for brain cancers with a small trial showing pretty dramatic benefit. Beyond that, if you're a listener and you're wondering, I have a cancer, should I use the cannabis? My internal guide tells me absolutely. It must for every cancer patient out there. Problem is I can't base that on research data. I can't simply say, well, this is why you're going to use it. Here's the paper. Like that's how we work in the clinical settings, right? We're not going to give something to patients just because we think it's going to work. We give it because there's been an assessment done in an evidence-based format that proves that tool is effective. So with that disclaimer, the rest of our conversation, I'm going to probably keep repeating saying, yeah, no, I think it's this, but probably there's not enough evidence to be conclusive. But I think that's going to change rapidly because partially there's a huge commercial interest. And so there's more and more industry that is sponsoring different trials. We're actually probably going to start one of such trials, not hopefully in too long in the future, looking for chronic pain. So there's just a lot more interest showing up, looking at different extracts and different routes and different preparations of cannabis be actually disease modifying. And, my personal interest is Parkinson and Alzheimer's disease. And at the conference that I just went to, we're beginning to really figure out what is the future of research in this topic is. But it sounds like it's very bright. My prediction is that cannabis will be used as cure for both Parkinson and Alzheimer's within 5 to 10 years. So we're not looking too far out.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm basing this primarily on not just basic understanding of what happens in those diseases and the fact that endocannabinoid system is heavily dysregulated. We already knew this for about 10 years. But we seemingly now seeing animal studies showing that at the right application, cannabis cures Alzheimer's disease, at least in small animals. Well, that translates to humans. Not everything that happens in small animals translates to humans, but I'm a believer in this, actually. So I know it's not necessarily the topic of today's conversation, but I thought this would be a nice prelude to.
No, but it is interesting because we know women, I think, are well over half of the cases of Alzheimer's. And we hear consistently that in menopause and perimenopause, we're at a greater risk for getting dementia and Alzheimer's. So it's comforting to hear that maybe down the road.
Right. Well, that's definitely the case because when estrogen starts to decreasing, the estrogen is pretty important in a regulatory, in a cognitive function. So that's probably some of the link. Mm-hmm. So but as I think I mentioned it already, if you think about all kinds of medical problems we have, like everything that in, Harry's book of Eternal Medicine, pretty much I can say that almost every medical problem you can think of, cannabis is going to have a role. It may not have a role now, but that's only because we don't have a full research yet engaged. And I'm not saying this because I'm a pot promoter. No, I'm saying this because the internal system, the endocannabinoid system, is dysregulated in almost every chronic medical problem. Okay. I'll give you a simple example. I was one of the most important topics for me at this conference turned out to be a study of older adults looking at the effect of cannabis on high blood pressure. And turned out it's one of the best antihypertensives that we can have. It has a very predictable drop in blood pressure, about 5 points, with all minimum side effects. And I didn't even know about this. And I would think that why would hypertension have effect? Turns out that it does. And I bet that we're going to see this in every medical problem, including everything menopause related. I have no doubt. It's just a matter of how will we get there uncovering some of these pieces.
That's interesting. So I was going to say, what's your hunch for why we're suffering from your area of expertise? We're suffering with this transition. And I wonder, I guess you're sort of suggesting that this endocannabinoid system is dysregulated and sparking some of these problems.
Oh, I'm sure. I think key question is, how does it ties all together? How does it tie with serotonergic dysregulation? How does it tie with, estrogen drop? And it does. Some of it, this is sort of not where I would say I'm the real expert. I mean, I know, I'll tell you what I do know in a minute. But I think some of this also, the science is just really not there yet. There are a lot of really basic questions we don't have good answers for. I mean, we understand that after age of 14, game's over regarding the cannabinoid system because you start having gradual decline in production of the most important cannabinoids, anandamide and 2-HE, which are THC-like, tetrahydrocannabinol-like. But why does it happen this way? And is that decline linear? Does it elevates after menopause later? Does that decline accelerates, which we actually think it does? And what is the clinical significance of it? Does that mean around the menopause, all women have to start substituting with some exogenous cannabinoids? I mean, it's a fascinating question to which no one has good answer yet, but the intuitive ideas is absolutely. I mean, because you would want to figure out, I mean, we've been yo-yoing around hormonal replacements forever. And the problem is, it turns out you give hormones, you have side effects. With cannabis, there is no such thing. You give cannabis, there is no side effects in the long run. I mean, if you're stupid, you overdose it and you're on a car in a tree. Okay, I mean, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if you correctly provide optimization of the decrease in endocannabinoid tone, there's seemingly only benefits with zero side effects. And, we haven't really had history here to look at the data for decades and say, well, now we have some conclusive historic data. I think it'll come over time. But, question is to the listeners, what is your personal endocannabinoid dysregulation? One of the kind of the gurus of our field, the kind of the lead researcher is Ethan Russo. He always says that, everybody have endocannabinoid deficiency. Every adult after age of 25. The question, what is your personal dysregulation and how do you fix it? And most of the time, this has to get addressed on experimental level. N of 1, you have to try some things yourself to see how you respond to each possible, exogenous cannabinoid, terpenes, and all this. So that's another thing. Everybody thinks that cannabis is THC and CBD. It's a complete misunderstanding. THC and CBD are not even most important items anymore. They're just like, okay, they're main constituents, main ingredients, but nothing's going to happen without other critical molecules, terpenes, and minor endocannabinoids. Now we have CBG, which is thought to be cannabidiol, which is actually probably going to be one of the most important things for the menopause, because it's a mood optimizer. It's an appetite stimulant. There's certain features of it that are unique from THC and CBD. But, there's also acidic forms, CBDA and THCA. We try to outline all of this in the book. And the only problem is by the time we finish writing the book, there's so much new data that we're like, should we go back and read? This is a topic where every book, by the time it comes out, it's already outdated. So I don't feel bad that somehow we didn't do something. It's not possible to do everything because
in this space where it's moving so quickly, particularly. So you mentioned CBG, you mentioned terpenes. How do women wrap their head around these different things when they're maybe don't even know about THC or CBD?
I'd say get the book and read it. And the reason is very simple. It's so complex that you need time to process the information. I can give the basic lecture in 60 minutes, but the amount of information in that lecture is going to be like so massive that to process it is not going to be really easy. It's just, it took us decades to kind of get a good sense of certain endogenous processes like the cortisol system and then the opioid system. It's not any different. It's actually much more complex and much more different and much more sophisticated in how it interacts with the rest of our functioning. But we do have to learn it because the potential is so massive. And I know that the women past the age of 50 are one of the smartest and best healthcare consumers because they want to learn. It's guys like me in their 30s and 40s think they're going to live forever and nothing can touch them. They think they're invincible until stuff starts happening. Women is a lot smarter, right? So they're like, yeah, I got to learn all this and then I'll teach my husband. Usually men coming up to me in the clinic, usually the ones dragged by their wives, say, you got to go see this guy because he's going to help you stay healthy, not to, just manage your conditions. So you have to read a lot. You have to learn a lot. You do want to experiment some because figuring out what's your personal cannabinoid tone is not there are some ways to learn it without taking anything, but unfortunately, that's not fully possible unless you're a true expert in the topic. And it's fortunately easy to do. CBD is in every state. CBG is in every state. CBDA is in every state. THCA is soon going to be in every state. Anything but THC you can have access pretty much easily. The prices are coming down. Routes available, so topical. And let's actually talk about this because I tend to put more emphasis on topicals, vaginal and rectal suppositories and sublingual drops more than other cannabis experts, I would say, because as a geriatrician, I know the value of non-oral route. because often that's you don't want to, you want to minimize certain interactions, you want to minimize taste problems, you want to minimize, especially people who's not even cognitively aware, how are you going to give them something to swallow if there's a risk of them choking on it, right? So having alternative routes of administration is critical. So we should talk about that sooner or later.
Yes, I will bring that up. For now, we know that there was a couple of studies. There was one at University of Alberta that came out last year. There was Veterans Affairs in California talking about women are doing this. Like it's between a third to a quarter who are doing it, and where they're finding out about it, friends and family. What can it help with? Because it seems like it's sleep, it's anxiety, it's muscle aches. What can women consider it for?
So I would say sleep, it's the number one. And the reasons for that is simple. It's about 80-90% effective. So when you find the right mix, and the book has details on which mix to get and how to start. So I don't think I'm going to go into that. It's going to be too detailed. But if you pick the right products, and this is about 80-90% effective. And we don't have anything come close to that. For pain, cannabis is probably 50-50. For things like nausea, it's also maybe 60%, but it's just not. For sleep, it seems to be the universally effective. Why? Is because actually cannabis is what regulates sleep. Thinking that melatonin regulates it is kind of misguided. I don't want to go there. Melatonin has a lot less role to play in sleep than actually people think. It's really the cannabis that initiates and maintains the sleep. It's the endogenous cannabinoid system. And there are other important players, but so definitely sleep, and especially sleep around menopause. I had tremendous successes, and you need very little. You can even try just CBD, and the sleep pulls everything with it. If you don't sleep, the next day you're more in pain and you're more depressed and everything seems to be worse, right? And if the sleep is disturbed chronically, then you start having chronic medical problems, high blood pressure and all kinds of things. Okay. And so that's a big one. Occasional spasms, especially if you are a very sensitive person and the topical application is going to work for you, I would say topical cannabis creams are godsend for occasional leg spasms. Or actually for any pain, whether it's a neck, a back, anything. Topicals don't work well in most patients. I would say it's only 20-30% effective. But for those for whom it's effective, it's like the number one treatment. Okay. Because there's no side effects, it's very low cost, it's easy to get, But for the rest of us, you really would want to probably take oral. And then for vaginal pain, for rectal pain, or for back pain, my first line is suppositories, whether they're vaginal or rectal. That's a big one. Definitely as a lubricant. So the THC-containing lubricants have been used for thousands of years. Seems to be the number one aphrodisiac, and also just it enhances not just sex; it actually enhances any touch pleasure. And actually it's also decreases pain. So if there is a problem in a woman who, not just with lack of satisfaction, but also pain during intercourse, it should be the first line treatment, because it's so easy to apply, and you don't have to apply it as suppository. Okay, that may be somewhat, off-putting for some people, but you can use it as a cream. And there's now pretty much in every dispensary, you can buy THC containing lubricants. Wow. And even if you can't find that because you're in a state that doesn't allow it, you actually can make your own. So that's another massive advantage. There are pretty much information on how to make your own cannabis everywhere. You can buy books on Amazon. There's all kinds of, I'm personally not like, I don't grow. I don't, as a manufacturer, I don't understand some of these intricacies, but I do understand that, especially for the oil-based lubricants, cannabis is going to be very easy to mix in. You can get a base cannabis oil, what we call often FICO, full extract cannabis oil. And then you can mix that with the oil-based lubricant. It's going to mix really well. And then you can use it for pain. You can use it for dryness. You can use it for just to enhance pleasure. Wow. And the data on that is reasonable.
Okay.
Now, people, of course, always smoked pot to get high and then have sex. Well, that too, but that's a bit actually more controversial because it's a sweet spot there, pun intended. If you take a little too much, you actually turn off the sex drive, and like it's harder to reach the orgasm, and it seemingly actually increases dissatisfaction with sex. But if you take just the right amount, it actually dramatically enhances it. And there are studies that looked into this, and not just. There's a lot of observational assessments, but there's also been a couple of smaller control trials showing that seems to be standing the trial of testing.
Oh, this is amazing. So the genitourinary syndrome of menopause, all of those constellation of symptoms, it can actually.
Exactly.
That's something else.
Well, and then again, it goes back to the same fact that there's probably a link to the endogenous drop in this cannabis tone. So you're not, in essence, why it's potentially so effective is you're not really doing anything that you're simply replacing what's body missing. It's the same issue as you would try to put estrogen back in if it's lacking. Yeah. Problem with estrogen, as we know, you take a little too much and then you're going to have issues.
Okay.
But anyway.
Is there any interplay if people were using hormone therapy, estrogen and progesterone or testosterone? Is there any concern that using this in some way would create any issues?
Not at all. I mean, if you don't know better and you take any replacement orally, then you're in trouble, and you shouldn't be, because the hormones should not go through the liver. So it should be no first pass. Certain types of cannabinoids, particularly CBD, can change how liver metabolizes medications. But clinically, we're not really seeing that impact our care much. It's a theoretical fear. There may be some areas where it sort of applies, like seizures and a few others, but I don't think this would play out here. So I don't think there's any concern. And moreover, I think if you're applying it topically or vaginally, there is really zero concern, because that's not going to go through the liver.
Okay. And we do hear about this in perimenopause. Women are always saying they can't drink like they used to. Our livers are
That's exactly right.
Our livers are sort of busy dealing with
busy is right.
Yeah.
Well, also as we all get older, unfortunately, we tend to accumulate toxins, and that's another, whether it's a mercury from fish or teeth you have in your mouth or pesticides in your neighbor's backyard. We tend to have slower capacity to get rid of these things. And the same goes true for every medication you take, for even some supplements, et cetera. So I think as metabolism slows down, some of this starts occurring more as a nature of getting older, not necessarily that it's just a menopausal issue. It's just the issue that some of the organs are not functioning as if 20 years before.
Okay. What is your advice for women trying to talk to their doctors about this? Or do you think this is something they should try to handle on their own? I don't think very many doctors at this point are going to know really what they're talking about.
No, you're absolutely right. We even wrote like a whole chapter there. How do you deal with your doctor? Because frankly, that's exactly the case. I say, doctors still often in majority stay away from this topic, but I'll tell you, we're not stupid people. We understand that the evidence for everything trumps your personal opinion, if you're a good doctor, that is. And, and as evidence grows, more and more doctors say, hey, that's valuable. I give regular grand rounds at George Washington University on this topic every couple of years. And first time I gave it, when I asked, well, so who's already here at GW prescribing? And there were about 300 doctors in the room. And only 2 hands went up, mine and my former chief of geriatrics. And now when I did this just recently, there's 18. So, it's growing. It's not growing crazily exponentially, but it's growing. So your doctor may actually know about it, or at least your doctor probably heard about it and have some relatively neutral opinion. And if you come to this not as, oh my God, how can you not know, stupid you, but say, look, I heard about, what is your opinion? By the way, here's the book, and give them the book and say, it's written by a doctor, and maybe you want to learn a little bit, and maybe we can talk about next time. And also, we do read studies that patients bring us. We may look a little upset that your Google search produced something, and that you think that your Google is better than my medical school experience. But we're listening to this, right? Because ultimately, the truth is not what we think it is. It's always changing. So the data will trump all of this. I think the part of the big problem, which this is my personal passion, that's what I'm trying to do now, is that the next wave of doctors is not getting enough education. So I think we have to put in a medical school curriculum a requirement for this topic to be mastered at a certain level, so that every graduating medical student in US, when they graduate, can say, I know this much. Now, we need to determine what this much means, but in reality, no one has done this. So we're trying to come up with kind of a national standard right now and see if that goes in. But the bigger problem is not doctors. The bigger problem is the dispensaries.
Oh, okay.
Because you can get a recommendation from your doctor. Your doctor may even know a little bit until you go get this. But then you go to dispensary, because the doctor has zero control on what you're going to buy. Zero. There's no way to control it, because the government in every state prohibits doctor interacting with dispensaries, because that's thought to have illegal ramifications, which arguable, but and I'll tell you how I'm dealing with this in a second. But so you go to dispensary, well, and then all bets are off. You may end up with a wonderful bud tender who knows a lot and can give you a great suggestion. Or you can end up with 18-year high school student who's clueless, and will give you crazy personal opinion, like, oh, I smoked some pot last night and sex was great. Why don't you just go home and smoke this half of this bottle, and naive patient will just go paranoid crazy and will never touch it again, right? So there's a lot of bad advice still going on. The states cope with this differently. Some states requiring that every bit of information coming out of those bud tenders' mouths is somehow guided by a clinical person. So Connecticut, Maryland now, Chicago, Michigan, different states beginning to put in a very special way of dealing with this problem, but it's not universal. Some states have zero control, meaning, again, the variability of this is massive. So that's why I think you have to become your own advocate in this. Like, you really have to learn some basics so that when you show up to the dispensary and you get crazy advice, that you're saying, no, thank you. I don't want what you're telling me. I need this. So you do need to be that detailed to understand what you're actually looking for.
A lot of women my age, when you talk about this, we've all had that experience from when we were young, where we had an overwhelming experience, and maybe quite a few people are walking around now like, I don't know. I remember that time when I couldn't talk for hours at a time. So I know in your book, you mentioned go low and slow and stop when you get where you need to go. How does that kind of unfold? How should add to that?
Right. So the stop where you need to go means that more is not better. So the maximum effect appears in a J curve. So like you start and it's not working very well or not at all. Then you titrate up, and then you hit a certain perfect spot, sweet spot, where it's going to work the best. If you've got to keep going up and taking more, the benefit will disappear quickly. So that's why you have to stop, because more is going to be worse, not better. So it's actually not, it's a pretty unique, there's some other substances that do that, but not that many. Often more will have stronger impact. Here it will not. Plus it will save you money, because it's just that simple. So that's one. Starting low has to do more with two things. Well, obviously a lot of people are more sensitive than they think, or that somebody else is thinking. So the recommendation may be take 5 milligrams of THC for chronic pain, but somebody may be so sensitive they only need a quarter of that dose. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to miss that. So you don't want to go straight from over that sweet spot, right? You want to start under and then get to it. And another benefit, when you're doing this, you somehow, when you start for this, what we call a subtherapeutic dose, so the dose less than, and I know that this less than what can produce benefit, you widening the therapeutic window, you enhancing the benefit. It's not fully understand why it's happening. The thinking is that when you first impact the receptors very slightly, you start fine-tuning the whole system to get a better impact. So a couple of days of 2 or 3 days of a very low dose tends to often increase the benefit after you titrate the dose. That's especially true with pain.
Okay.
It may be less true with sleep. It may be less true with some other conditions, but with like nausea. But with pain, it seems to be true.
Okay.
You want to kind of titrate it up very, very slowly, starting at the subtherapeutic dose.
Okay.
And then slow is because, again, you don't want to overshoot. You need to titrate it up to a point where you know, okay, this is good. If you go too fast, you may either miss the window, or you may simply, you may not miss it, but you're going to think that you're not actually going to get there. You're going to say, okay, well, I'm feeling better, I'm going to stop here. Yeah, but I mean, maybe you want to go up, but if you go up twice, then you're definitely going to miss the sweet spot. So you have to really titrate by, some people say 20%, some people say 30%. I mean, the titration dose, that's where you really want to have an expert to work with you if your condition is complex. If your condition is very simple, like, you have a cramps, or you have some restless leg syndrome, for example, or you have, it's actually not so simple, but if you have condition that relatively self-limiting and you know it well and you know how to work with it, you can definitely try yourself. But again, you need to know the basics. You have to be very methodical and slow.
There is someone I follow on Instagram, Dr. Daniel Amen. I don't know if you know him. He's a psychiatrist. Yeah, sure. So he's a really cool guy, but he's not a fan. He's not a fan. He says he's done research and it shrinks.
He's an old school. He's an old school. And I'll tell you more than that. He doesn't understand some basic science. I've listened to what he has to say, and he's totally misjudging this whole topic of cannabis. And I see this repeatedly in multiple other, because the people who see addiction first, I have a favorite expression: you go to a butcher, you're not going to buy a salad. So there is a biased population. He's seeing primarily patients with addictions. And so when patient is addicted to cannabis, there's seemingly only negative impact. The problem is that it has nothing to do with medical application, right? It's a recreational use. Everything I was talking is medical. What is the difference is a critical aspect. Well, the difference is very simple. Recreational, everything is about THC. There's no CBD, there is no entourage effect. It's all about THC. And so people just get high, and almost exclusively it's smoking. Why? Because it's a rapid onset. You get high almost instantly within a few seconds. And you can predictably get high. The problem with other methods of intake, like say oral, right? So it's like candy or chew or whatever, chocolate or brownie. You're going to get high potentially, and maybe even higher than when you smoke, but it all depends on what you ate at the same time. It depends on so many factors. It depends, did you drink alcohol around the same time? It depends on whether or not you had a fatty meal or carbohydrate high meal. So there's all these factors that playing in, so it's less consistent. And of course, the bigger issue with non-recreational is that we never give unopposed THC. It's exceedingly rare for me to give a product or recommend a product that only has THC, because the value of that can be enhanced so potently by other cannabinoids, by terpenes, by flavonoids, that, we don't practice that way. And so what he's seeing, what Dr. Amen's seeing, is just people recreational, but he's missing a whole boat of medical application completely, because just not the patients he's seeing. Just like I'm not seeing any surgical patients in my practice or any kids. So, we have in my area, Dr. Patricia Fry, who's kind of the outmost cannabis expert in our area, but she's a pediatrician, so she sees tons of kids. So if I have a problem, and I was like, wow, I'm a 7-year-old, I have teenagers in the house. That's it. That's my relationship with pediatrics. But like, I'm a geriatrician, I look at the other spectrum. But so of course I'll send patients to her. So I think that's another thing. We need to all understand that you got to find the perfect provider for you. And often those providers are not the outmost experts out there or the most visible people. They're often quiet people in the community, and they know way more than me and Dr. Neiman. And, there's nothing wrong with that. It's simply each one of us have our own niche and our own role to play.
Okay.
For me, as a geriatrician, I see a lot of postmenopausal problems, and especially things that are really hard to treat, like the, irritable bladder syndrome, chronic vaginal dryness, frequent, urinary dysfunction, like all of those things that are often so hard to manage. That's where I use cannabis all the time, because often there is no better tool. I mean, or let me reframe. It's not necessarily the better tool, safer tool. I don't have anything safer than cannabis. The cannabis is pretty much the safest thing than Tylenol, than Motrin, than anything I can offer to my person over 65. Okay. And that's why I think I became so fascinated by it, not necessarily because I think it's like the best tool, most effective. No, there's tools for pretty much everything. If you study hard enough, you'll know the value of it. But it's the safest by far. And the more I look at it, the more I realize we should be screaming and recommending it to almost every one of our patients in one way or another, because it'll cut suffering and deaths. I'm guessing that potential of cannabis to save lives is somewhere at about 50 to 100,000 lives per year when applied right.
Wow. Because
we killed about 250,000 of Americans every year with medications, and that's appropriate medications. That does not include recreational drug overdose, opioid overdose. This is just like I prescribe Tylenol and the person dies because of liver failure. So I'm talking about those kind of things. So that's about 250,000 per year. If we universally start using cannabis for every existing condition, we know that at least with opioids, with sleeping aids, with tranquilizers, with antidepressants, we see a drop about 30 to 50% persistently. No matter where we look, what condition, there is an immediate drop in use of those medications. So for opioids and Medicare population, when the cannabis was instituted, since it was instituted, we saw about 4 million daily decrease in prescriptions, 4 million per day of narcotics. So that translates in a pretty massive life saved.
Yeah.
Now, why are we not hearing more about? Because that means that the pharma gonna lose trillions, not billions, trillions of dollars, over decades. They don't want to hear this. They want to first develop their own pharmaceutical cannabis drugs, and then go from what they're selling now to that. And then they say, okay, fine, now we're ready to implement this. Okay. This is how it's going to happen. But our consumers, my patients, your followers, they should be voting with the wallets and feet, because the reality is data is there. I'm not saying anything that you can't verify. Go and look it up.
Do you have any sense that there's preventative benefits?
That's a little less clear. I would definitely say for urine infections and because it's so effective for vaginal dryness, I'd say sure for that. But for other things, it's a little harder to say. I would say that some of the experts like Dustin Select will probably say, are you crazy? Of course there's a prevent. See, I'm a little more cautious because it's not yet cheap tool. If this would be more like, B complex or magnesium cost-wise per month, I would immediately say, yes, everybody should. But it's still, we're talking $50 to $100, a typical monthly bill. That's not cheap change. So I'm hesitant mostly for that reason, but I would say absolutely. There is dry skin. I mentioned dry, so many possible applications. Like now we're really waiting for the eye drops, cannabis eye drops, because they're going to help the dry eye syndrome. They're going to help the glaucoma. They had all kinds of things, right? And they're going to be probably, in a long run, cheaper than existing drugs for those conditions. But again, that's a future. But if you grow your own, so this is where things could be very effective. If you're in a luxury position, you have a backyard or you're in a state where you can do that and you grow your own plants, then you're in a golden, because of course, then the plant itself is fascinating, right? It has a nutritional value. It's full of antioxidants and flavonoids. So you can harvest other benefits out of it. I mean, you can make tinctures or teas out of it, etc. But But I don't think I'm an expert enough to say, okay, use it this way so you're going to prevent something. I am trying to do that for my patients who I'm worried about cognitive decline, but I'm doing this out of belief, not out of data, which is when that happens, I can't speak to that in front of the recording because I don't feel comfortable. I can't vouch for that. Maybe I'm wrong. You have to acknowledge that until clear data comes out, our opinions is just that.
Okay, and in terms of misinformation, because you talked about this in the book too, just some top things to watch out for when...
Well, first, that it's addictive substance. It's a misunderstanding. We know exactly it's about 10% addictive. So if you smoke every day, you have about 10% addiction. But even then, it's not true addiction. It's a psychological desire to stay high. It's extremely different from alcohol and opioids. Dosage addictive substances, if you cut cold turkey, you're going to get really sick. You could die. With cannabis, okay, well, you get a little angry. You may not sleep well for a couple of nights, but there's no chance of any real problem. Then there's this whole myth that you can overdose and you can die from it. And that's a total nonsense. There's not a single death attributed to use of cannabis in entire human history. This has never been recorded, and it never will be. In the 60s, they did this fascinating experiment. I wish somebody would have recorded that on a video. They tried to kill a monkey with cannabis. They stuck the poor thing into a cage, plastic cage, and they were sticking cigarettes in it until monkey died. And they were like, oh, finally, after 800 cigarettes, we killed the poor thing. Turned out died from asphyxiation, from carbon monoxide poisoning, not from cannabis. We have no idea what the lethal dose of cannabis is. It's impossible. It's improbable to give it. So that's a myth, complete myth. It's also a myth that it's side effect free. There is a proponent that's saying, oh my God, it's the best thing ever. Just take it. And total nonsense. When you overdose, you can get really scared. You can get paranoid. There's a lot of dizziness related to it. There's a lot of dry mouth, frequency of urination. People can get kind of somnolent and just like really lethargic for a long time. So it's a side effect prone thing, just like everything else. I think another myth is that somehow everybody have to smoke it. Like that every cannabis user smoker, like that I get from doctors. They're like, oh, I would start conversation about something and they're like, yeah, but we don't like people smoke anything. I'm like, who told you that you should be smoking? Like, why is this in your head? Like, come on, it's 2022. I never recommend smoking products, mostly because, again, I'm a geriatrician, right? So why would I give any of my older patients recommendation of inhaling anything hot? I don't care whether there's no risk of lung cancer, by the way. In fact, there's decrease in lung cancer if you smoke pot versus if you do nothing. It's tiny decrease, but it's there according to studies. But the chronic cough and bronchitis will go up in chances. So why would you smoke, right? If you have sublinguals, topicals, rectal, now we're going to have the ophthalmic, we get topicals now as patches. We have topicals as cream. We're probably going to have subcutaneous forms soon where you inject something and it stays there for a long time. So we have all kinds of ways of administering. So inhaled route is still a predominant use out there, but a lot of it has to do with how people like to control their symptoms. If you're in pain, you're not going to want to sit there for an hour to wait for the relief. You'd want to be relieved instantly. So, we have to understand that people will do what they will do. There's nothing wrong with that. But as a physician and scientist, I'd say inhaled route needs to be discouraged at every level.
So don't be scared. Your body's made for this.
Exactly.
Your body wants this. Anything else? Last words?
Learn the cost. So, I work with half of my patients are Medicare, Medicaid. So I'm very cost savvy. And for that reason, I don't work with very large brands because they way overpriced and they're not any better than small boutique brands that tend to cost often a lot less. So I promised you I'll say how I do this practically. I always try to get CBD from hemp, not because the quality is better, quality is questionably worse, but because it's a lot cheaper. And over the years, I evolved a few companies. I'm not going to mention that on the camera. It's relevant. But, so I recommend certain brands because I know they're very top brands. They're high quality and they're a lot cheaper. And they're a lot cheaper than what people can get from dispensaries. So dispensaries are for THC-containing products. That's how I think. And also because when they go to dispensary, often things happen beyond my control. It just happens. So if I tell the patient otherwise, I give them prescription and say, here, you're going to go on the internet and buy this brand, this particular product, and you're going to take it this way. That's how we work as physicians. When you prescribe medication, you tell exactly how to take, when to take, and what side effects to watch out for, right? And this is a standard practice of medicine. But I would say that learn to get the brands you like, stick to them. If particular brand is out of production for a period of time, okay, get some substitution. And don't be afraid of just saying no to the dispensaries, because they often need to sell stuff that's getting close to expiration date, and you're your own consumer. You got to really control that and say, no, forget it. I'll wait another month until you get this batch back in the stock. It's fine, and stock up. So do have an extra at home, because often what happens, this is the second big problem with industry, is not only there's certain push to sell certain things, but often the way it's made, it's in batches. And when the batch run out, sometimes there's a disruption in the raw material supply, especially with COVID. And so you may not get what you're used to for a while, or when it comes back in stock, it may actually be a slightly different product, and you're going to have to get used to again to modify your dosing up or down slightly. So with that, learn the labels. That's a very important point. Read the labels right. Compare the label to the product you took before, because it may actually have a different amount of active cannabinoids of THC. So we usually follow the THC dosing for the titration, because the THC is what causes the psychotoxicity. Every cannabinoid is psychoactive, but the toxicity, that being high, only caused by THC. And so learn your dose of THC, and then you can go from one particular product to another, taking same amount of THC, even though the rest may be different, and then the impact may be totally different. But this way, you're not going to overdose. So you're not going to end up with a situation where you took same amount of THC and somehow you're 10 times higher. That's just not going to happen unless you switch the route of administration. So if you're going from smoking to eating it, you may have all kinds of different effects. So I think that's enough. And get the book. It's full of very good information. Sorry, my co-author, I always forget to do this. My co-author always say, you got to sell the book.
Yeah, well, it's full of, I've read it. It's full of advice. It's like a primer.
Thank you.
It's right. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Love being here. Good luck to everybody. And thanks for doing this. This is so important.
Thank you for watching and being an important part of the Menopause Shift Summit. To hear more from amazing experts like Dr. Mikhail Kogan, please check out our other interviews. And if you missed anything from some of our experts, consider upgrading to our VIP pass. You'll have full lifetime access to all the recordings, plus other bonuses you won't want to miss. Thanks again for watching.